Under a vivid Montana sunset, retired military K-9 handler Sarah Mitchell pulls into an isolated gas station, unaware she's stepping into danger. Still haunted by memories of war and the injury that left her wheelchair-bound, Sarah now dedicates her life to training extraordinary canine partners. But when a notorious motorcycle gang confronts her, they quickly discover they've severely underestimated the power of loyalty, courage, and highly specialized military dogs. Experience a heart-pounding story of resilience, justice, and an unbreakable bond, proving that heroes sometimes have 4 legs and unstoppable hearts. Welcome back. Before we start, remember to hit the like and subscribe for new stories every day. Bikers tease female K-9 handler at gas station, but instantly regret it when her military dogs react. The Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and violet as Sarah Mitchell guided her weathered pickup truck into the nearly abandoned gas station on Route 89. Her calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening momentarily as a spasm of pain shot through her lower back. 6 years had passed since the IED explosion in Afghanistan that had claimed her ability to walk and the lives of 3 members of her unit, but the phantom pains still visited like unwelcome guests. In the modified rear compartment of her truck, 2 sets of alert eyes watched her every movement. Ace, a Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of burnished copper, and Titan, a coal-black German shepherd with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, remained perfectly still, awaiting her command. These weren't just pets. They were extensions of her will, combat partners who had saved more lives than most decorated soldiers. "Just a quick stop, boys," Sarah murmured, reaching for her wheelchair beside the passenger seat. 20 minutes, tops. The early October chill penetrated her jacket as she expertly transferred herself from the driver's seat to the wheelchair. At 36, Sarah's upper body strength remained impressive, a necessity born from adaptation rather than choice. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and though time and hardship had etched fine lines around her eyes, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had faced death and refused to blink. The Last Chance Gas and Groceries stood like a lone sentinel on this stretch of highway, 30 miles from the nearest town. Its faded sign flickered erratically, casting sporadic pools of neon across the gravel lot. Sarah had stopped here countless times during her travels between her remote training facility in the mountains and the Veteran Rehabilitation Center in Helena, where she volunteered. Tonight, however, something felt different. The usual pickup truck belonging to Old Man Winters, the station's owner, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, 5 gleaming motorcycles were arranged in a semicircle near the entrance, their chrome fixtures reflecting the dying sunlight like predatory eyes. Sarah hesitated, her instincts, honed through 3 combat tours, prickling with warning. She glanced at her watch, calculating. The next gas station was 45 minutes away, and her fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. "Stay," she commanded softly to the dogs, keeping the rear windows cracked precisely 4 inches. Enough for air, but not enough for escape unless she gave the specific release command. Both animals became statues, though their eyes remained fixed on her with unwavering attention. The store's interior was dimly lit, the fluorescent tubes overhead humming and flickering with age. Sarah navigated her wheelchair past dusty shelves of canned goods and travel necessities, heading toward the refrigerated section for a bottle of water. No sign of Winters, but the muffled sounds of male laughter drifted from the back office. At the counter, a young woman with frightened eyes and a name tag reading, Amy, startled when Sarah approached. "Just the water and $30 on pump 2, Sarah said, placing exact change on the counter. Amy's gaze flicked nervously toward the back room before leaning forward. "You should go," she whispered urgently. "They've been here for hours, and there." The office door banged open, cutting off Amy's warning. 5 men sauntered into the store, their leather vests emblazoned with the unmistakable crimson skull insignia of the notorious Crimson Reapers motorcycle gang. Their reputation had grown increasingly sinister over the past 18 months. Rumors of drug trafficking, protection rackets, and worse had followed in their wake as they expanded territory across 3 states. The leader, a mountain of a man with a salt and pepper beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, stopped short when he spotted Sarah. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept from her face to her wheelchair and back again. his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Well, what do we have here? His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it all the more menacing. The patch on his vest identified him as Grave, the gang's president. Sarah met his gaze steadily, her expression neutral. She'd faced Taliban warlords and insurgent commanders. This posturing didn't impress her. Just getting gas, she replied evenly, tucking the water bottle into the small bag hanging from her wheelchair. Pretty late for a lady to be out alone on these roads, said another man, leaner and younger, with a neck tattoo that crept above his collar like reaching fingers. His patch read Switchblade. I manage fine, Sarah replied, turning her chair toward the exit. The group shifted subtly, not quite blocking her path, but making it clear that leaving wouldn't be simple. How about some company? Switchblade suggested, stepping closer. Roads can be dangerous. Pretty thing like you needs protection. Sarah's expression remained composed, though something dangerous flickered in her eyes. I appreciate the concern, but I'm in a hurry. Grave chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. What's the rush? We're just being friendly. He moved closer, towering over her wheelchair. Seems rude to run off so quick. Outside in the truck, Ace and Titan had not moved, but their breathing had changed. Years of working with Sarah had attuned them to subtle shifts in her voice, in the electrical signals of her body's stress response. They could smell the adrenaline even through the closed doors and glass separating them. Inside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Old Man Winters know you boys are making his customers uncomfortable? Sarah asked calmly, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Something ugly crossed Graves' face. Winters took a little vacation. Indefinite, you might say. We're helping Amy here mind the store, aren't we, sweetheart? The young woman behind the counter stared at the floor, her shoulders hunched. I see, Sarah said, her mind racing. Well, I've got my gas and I'll be on my way. Switchblade moved to stand directly in her path. What's the hurry? We got questions. He squatted down to eye level with her chair, his breath reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. Like what's a pretty crippled girl doing out here all alone? Kind of suspicious, don't you think, boss? Very suspicious, Grave agreed, his voice hardening. Especially with all the interesting traffic we've noticed on this stretch lately. DEA, maybe? Or some kind of informant. Sarah recognized the dangerous turn. These men weren't simply harassing her. They suspected she might be a threat to whatever operation they were running out of this remote location. The isolation that had once made this gas station a convenient stop now made it the perfect place for something to go very wrong. I'm a dog trainer, she said truthfully. I work with service animals for veterans. You can check my ID. Oh, we'll check a lot more than that, Graves said, nodding to two of his men, who moved to flank Sarah's wheelchair. In the truck, Ace's ears pricked forward and Titan's muscles coiled imperceptibly tighter. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the small remote device clipped to her belt, a specialized transmitter linked to the custom collars both dogs wore. Not shock collars as many assumed, but sophisticated communication devices she had developed during her years as the military's top K-9 program innovator. Last chance to be reasonable, Sarah said quietly. I'm just passing through. Switchblade laughed, placing a hand on her wheelchair's armrest and leaning in. That's cute. But here's what's going to happen. We're going to take a little ride, have a chat with some friends who... His words died in his throat as Sarah pressed a button on the remote. Outside, a soft tone sounded in both dogs' collars, a specific frequency that activated a very specific protocol. Within seconds, the world exploded into motion. The rear windows of Sarah's truck, designed with a special emergency release mechanism, dropped completely. In perfect synchronization, Ace and Titan launched themselves through the openings, their powerful bodies moving with terrifying precision. They crossed the 40 yards between the truck and the gas station in seconds, their paws barely seeming to touch the ground. No barking, no growling, just the silent, focused intent of apex predators with a mission. The gas station's door had a simple push bar that Ace hit with his front paws at full speed, throwing it open with a bang that made everyone inside freeze. Both dogs entered low and fast, moving in perfect tactical formation, a living embodiment of thousands of hours of specialized training and natural ability. Their targeting was flawless. Titan went straight for Switchblade, who still had his hand on Sarah's wheelchair. 100 pounds of muscle and controlled fury slammed into the man's chest, sending him crashing into a display of potato chips. The dog's jaws closed around his wrist, not with the crushing force they were capable of, but with precise pressure, targeting the radial nerve in a specialized control bite that Sarah had pioneered. Switchblade screamed, more from shock than pain, as his arm went instantly numb. Titan maintained position, his body perfectly still except for the steady pressure on the man's wrist. Simultaneously, Ace had circled behind the 3 remaining gang members, effectively cutting off their access to both the exit and Sarah. His posture was a textbook display of controlled aggression, head low, eyes locked on, body coiled to spring in any direction required. "Call them off," Grave bellowed, reaching toward his waistband. "I wouldn't," Sarah advised calmly. "They're trained to respond to sudden movements with appropriate force, especially if those movements involve reaching for weapons. And trust me when I say their definition of appropriate force isn't something you want to experience." The gas station fell into tense silence, broken only by Switchblade's ragged breathing. "What you're seeing is remarkable restraint," Sarah continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "These aren't ordinary dogs. They've been through the most advanced tactical K9 training program in existence. The same program that revolutionized how military working dogs are deployed in combat zones. The program I designed." Recognition dawned slowly on Graves' face. "Mitchell," he said, the bluster draining from his voice. "Sarah Mitchell." Sarah inclined her head slightly. "You've heard of me. I'm flattered." The reputation of Major Sarah Mitchell, even years after her medical discharge, remained legendary in certain circles. The K9 training methodologies she had developed had changed the face of military and law enforcement canine programs worldwide. Her dogs weren't just trained to attack or defend, they were tactical partners capable of complex decision-making, threat assessment, and precision responses. "Those are military dogs," one of the other bikers said, his voice rising with panic. "Former military," Sarah corrected. "Like me. Now they're my partners. And they're currently very concerned about the threat you're posing to me." She glanced at Titan, who maintained his hold on Switchblade with machine-like consistency. Titan could sever that hand completely with one actual bite. Ace could take down all 3 of you before you could draw whatever weapons you're carrying. But they won't, unless I tell them to, or unless you do something stupid. Graves' eyes narrowed, calculating odds and outcomes. "What do you want?" "Originally? Just gas," Sarah replied. "Now I'm wondering what happened to Old Man Winters, why his teenage employee looks terrified, and what exactly you're running out of this place that makes you so nervous about strangers." Before Grave could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of another vehicle. Through the station's dirty windows, the headlights of a black SUV swept across the parking lot. "Expecting company?" Sarah asked, noting the flash of genuine alarm that crossed Graves' face. "This isn't what you think," he said quickly, his demeanor changing. "We're not," he cut himself off, visibly recalculating. The SUV's doors opened, and 4 men in civilian clothing emerged. To an untrained eye, they might have passed for businessmen or tourists, but Sarah instantly recognized the subtle indicators of military or paramilitary background. The way they moved, scanned their surroundings, positioned themselves relative to one another. "Your friends?" she asked Grave. His expression confirmed they were anything but. "You need to leave. Now." "Funny how quickly the dynamic changes," Sarah murmured, but her instincts were firing warning signals. Whatever was happening here went well beyond a biker gang harassing a lone woman. The gas station door opened, and 2 of the men entered. Their casual clothing couldn't disguise their military bearing, and Sarah immediately identified the subtle bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their jackets. "Gentlemen," the taller of the 2 said, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone accustomed to giving orders. "Seems we're interrupting a party." His gaze swept the scene, taking in the dogs, the fallen biker, and Sarah in her wheelchair with a coldly analytical assessment. "Just a misunderstanding," Graves said, his entire demeanor transformed from menacing to almost deferential. "We were just leaving." The newcomer smiled thinly. "I don't think so." He turned his attention to Sarah. "Major Mitchell, what an unexpected pleasure." Sarah studied him, searching her memory. "Do we know each other?" "Not personally, no. But your reputation precedes you." He extended his hand. "Colonel James Harrison, though I've recently transitioned to the private sector. Your work with the K9 program is legendary." Sarah didn't take the offered hand. "Funny you should know that, since most of my work was classified." Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "As I said, legendary in certain circles." He glanced admiringly at Ace and Titan. Magnificent animals. The perfect combination of genetics and training. But I'm sure I don't need to tell you that our mutual friends at DARPA always wondered if there might be shortcuts to achieving such results. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. The remote location, the nervous bikers, Harrison's cryptic references, something very off-book was happening here. DARPA has no friends, Sarah replied coolly. Just temporary allies of convenience. What's really going on here, Colonel? Harrison sighed, dropping the pretense of cordiality. What's going on, Major, is that you've stumbled into something considerably above your security clearance. These gentlemen, he gestured toward the bikers, provide certain logistical services for a private research initiative. One that continues the work you abandoned when you decided ethical concerns outweighed national security. Sarah's blood ran cold. During her final year with the K9 program, she had shut down a rogue element within the research division that had been exploring chemical and genetic enhancements for military working dogs, modifications that promised faster, stronger, more aggressive animals, but at the cost of devastating side effects, including significantly shortened lifespans and neurological deterioration. Project Cerberus was terminated, she said, her voice hardening. By direct order of the Joint Chiefs. Officially, yes, Harrison agreed. Unofficially, certain interested parties recognized its potential and arranged for the research to continue under private auspices. Sarah's mind raced. The remote gas station would make an ideal waypoint for transporting research subjects, chemicals, or equipment without attracting attention. The bikers provided deniable security and transportation. Where's Winters? She demanded. The old man became unnecessarily curious, Harrison said dismissively. He's being detained temporarily, for everyone's safety. And what happens now? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Harrison's expression hardened. Now we have a serious security breach to contain. Two, actually. He nodded toward Amy behind the counter. The girl has heard far too much. And you? Well, your presence here is particularly problematic, given your history with the program. One of Harrison's men moved toward Amy, who shrank back against the wall, while the other drew his weapon and aimed it at Sarah. The dogs will tear you apart before you can pull that trigger, Sarah warned. Perhaps, Harrison acknowledged. But my other men outside will ensure none of you leave alive. A tragic case of a veteran with PTSD who massacred a gas station full of innocent people before turning her combat-trained dogs on responding officers. The media will eat it up. The situation had deteriorated beyond negotiation. Sarah's hand moved toward the specialized remote at her belt, her fingers finding a different sequence of controls than the one she had used earlier. One last chance, Colonel, she said quietly. Walk away. Whatever you're doing here isn't worth dying for. Harrison laughed. Your dogs are impressive, Major, but they're just animals. They can't stop bullets. Sarah's lips curved in a smile that contained no humor. That's where you're wrong. They're not just animals. They're my partners. And we've been in far worse situations than this. With practiced precision, she pressed a complex sequence on the remote. Immediately, both dogs responded to the silent command relayed through their specialized collars. Titan released Switchblade's wrist and launched himself toward the armed man with astonishing speed. The man fired, but Titan was already airborne, his trajectory a precision arc that Sarah had drilled into him through thousands of repetitions. The bullet missed, and 85 pounds of German Shepherd struck him square in the chest. The impact knocked him backward, his head connecting with the edge of a shelf with an audible crack. Simultaneously, Ace moved on Harrison with such fluid speed that the colonel barely had time to register the attack. Ace didn't go for his throat or limbs as a conventional attack dog might. Instead, he targeted Harrison's gun hand with surgical precision, his jaws clamping around the man's wrist with exactly enough pressure to force him to drop the weapon without severing tendons or arteries. Outside, the other two men heard the gunshot and rushed toward the entrance, weapons drawn. But Sarah had anticipated this. A third press of her remote activated another protocol, and both doors to her truck flew open, releasing the contents of a hidden compartment beneath the rear seats. Two small drones, no larger than dinner plates, shot out of the truck and streaked toward the gas station entrance. Military-grade surveillance technology that Sarah had modified for tactical defensive applications, they moved with pre-programmed precision, discharging targeted electrical pulses that struck both men as they reached the door. The charges weren't lethal but delivered enough voltage to disrupt neuromuscular function, sending both collapsing to the ground in convulsing heaps. Inside, the situation had been neutralized in less than 10 seconds. Harrison lay pinned beneath Ace's unwavering hold. The armed man was unconscious from his impact with the shelf, and the third man stood frozen, hands raised, unwilling to risk movement that might trigger another lightning response from the dogs. The bikers, having apparently decided their arrangement with Harrison wasn't worth dying for, had pressed themselves against the wall, making no moves to intervene. "Amy," Sarah called to the terrified young woman behind the counter. "There's a phone under the register. Call the sheriff and tell him Major Sarah Mitchell needs assistance at the Last Chance gas station. Tell him possible kidnapping of the owner and to bring federal agents. Then call this number." She recited a secure line to her former commanding officer, who still owed her more favors than either of them could count. As the girl made the calls with shaking hands, Sarah turned her attention back to Harrison, who glared at her with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he spat. "The advancements we've made." "Save it for your court-martial," Sarah cut him off. "I've seen your advancements. Dogs with neurological damage, so severe they attack their own handlers. Enhanced subjects with lifespans cut in half. That's not advancement. It's torture disguised as science. There are always casualties in progress," Harrison insisted. "The latest subjects are stable. Their capabilities are beyond anything your primitive training methods could achieve." Sarah's expression darkened. "That's where you're fundamentally wrong, Colonel. True partnership between humans and animals isn't about forcing evolution through chemicals and genetic manipulation. It's about understanding, communication, and trust built over time." She glanced at Ace and Titan, both still maintaining their positions with unwavering focus. "What makes these dogs exceptional isn't some genetic shortcut. It's thousands of hours of work, mutual respect, and a bond that people like you could never comprehend." Harrison laughed bitterly. "Noble sentiments from someone who developed targeting protocols that turned dogs into living weapons. I developed systems that saved lives, both human and canine," Sarah corrected him. "Every method I created was designed to minimize casualties on all sides. To make dogs partners in the field, not disposable assets." The distant sound of sirens began to filter through the night air. Amy had succeeded in contacting help. "They'll bury this," Harrison warned. "You know how these things work. Too many powerful interests involved." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged. "But I've spent the last 6 years building a network of my own. Journalists, advocacy groups, veterans who owe me favors. Whatever you're doing here gets exposed, one way or another." As the sirens grew louder, Sarah turned her wheelchair toward Amy, who stood trembling behind the counter. "Where's Old Man Winters?" she asked gently. "There's a storm cellar behind the station," the girl whispered. "They've been keeping him there for 3 days." Sarah nodded to the bikers. "One of you is going to show the police exactly where to find him, or my dogs will have new chew toys." The youngest of the bikers, barely more than 20, stepped forward nervously. "I'll show them. I never signed up for any of this. They just said it was a delivery job." "Smart choice," Sarah replied, as red and blue lights began to flash through the windows. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. The local sheriff arrived first, followed by state police and, within hours, federal agents whose identification badges Sarah recognized as belonging to a very specialized investigative unit. Old Man Winters was rescued from the storm cellar, dehydrated and bruised but otherwise unharmed. The investigation revealed that the gas station had been serving as a transfer point for an illegal research operation based in an abandoned mine facility 30 miles deeper into the mountains. Harrison and his men were taken into custody, though Sarah harbored no illusions that powerful forces would be working to minimize the damage. The bikers, it turned out, were largely unwitting participants, hired muscle who had been told they were providing security for valuable pharmaceutical shipments, not experimental subjects. 3 days later, Sarah sat on the porch of her remote cabin, watching as Ace and Titan explored the surrounding woods with boundless energy. Her phone rang, a secure line that very few people possessed. "Mitchell," she answered. "They found the facility," said the familiar voice of General Lawrence Harding, her former commanding officer and the man who had helped her shut down the original Project Cerberus. 17 dogs, all showing signs of chemical enhancement. 5 of them already exhibiting neurological symptoms. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Survivors. All of them, thanks to the protocols you left in place. The veterinary team is using your rehabilitation program for chemically exposed working dogs. Early signs are promising." "And Harrison?" Harding sighed. "Disappeared during transport, but his research data was secured. The project has been terminated permanently this time. I have the Secretary of Defense's personal guarantee. Until the next war, The next threat, the next excuse, Sarah said tiredly. Maybe, Harding acknowledged. But they'll have to do it without Harrison's research. And without you to clean up their mess. After ending the call, Sarah wheeled herself to the edge of the porch where a ramp led down to the yard. She whistled, a clear, piercing sound that carried through the trees. Within moments, Ace and Titan emerged from the forest, racing toward her with unbound joy, their earlier battlefield precision replaced by the simple happiness of dogs returning to someone they loved. As they reached her, Sarah leaned forward to ruffle their fur, receiving enthusiastic licks in return. These weren't weapons or tools, despite their remarkable abilities. They were her partners, her family, her reason for continuing when the darkness of her memories threatened to overwhelm her. Good boys, she murmured, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat. The very best boys. In the distance, the Montana mountains stood silhouetted against the setting sun, their ancient peaks indifferent to the machinations of men who sought shortcuts to power. Sarah knew the battle wasn't over. It never really would be. But she also knew that whatever challenges came next, she wouldn't face them alone. Beside her wheelchair, Ace and Titan settled, one on each side, their bodies warm against her legs that could no longer feel their touch. Yet somehow, through a connection that transcended physical sensation, Sarah felt their presence more profoundly than any other touch in her life. In a world obsessed with enhancement, augmentation, and artificial advancement, Sarah had discovered the most powerful force of all, a bond formed through mutual trust, respect, and thousands of hours of working together toward a common purpose. No laboratory could synthesize it, no chemical could enhance it, and no weapon could defeat it. As darkness fell over the mountains, Sarah Mitchell and her two extraordinary companions watched the stars appear one by one, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, not as master and pets, not as handler and weapons, but as a family forged in adversity and strengthened by love.